gracias. Thank you to Dr. Ramirez Leiva and Julieta Margarini for the opportunity to speak here. I will take the liberty of speaking in English because my Spanish would be painful to hear. My perspective is informed by the Center for Research Libraries, the organization which I work at. I'll tell you a little bit about CRL. CRL is a consortium of over 200 academic and independent research libraries in the United States, Canada. We have members in Germany, Hong Kong, India, and Lebanon. It's also a shared collection of over 5 million books, journals, archives, newspapers, dissertations, and reports. Most important, it's a community of specialists. It's a community of librarians who identify and preserve critical at-risk source materials. I'll talk today, we specialize in primary source documentation rather than scholarly books and journals. And we support advanced research, original research in the humanities and social sciences. I'll talk today about, talking in terms of 3 case studies. In the past, research libraries and public libraries have been collectors, custodians of critical documentation and evidence, like news, financial and statistical data, government documents and archives, and physical materials. Libraries have also been trustworthy sources of evidence for scholars, future generations of historians, and also for the courts. Curation produced transparency, equity, and accountability of key actors, both individual and corporate government actors in our society. Things have changed. There is new scale and complexity that digital media has brought to the scene, networks and digital networks and digital production. There's also been a coalescence of economic, political, and social factors that have placed new importance on information to finance, national security, business that have changed the landscape. These changes have profoundly transformed the life cycle of evidence, which challenge the abilities. These changes challenge the ability of libraries and traditional memory institutions to fulfill their traditional role in society. The late Dan Hazen, Associate University Librarian of Harvard University, in 2010 described that challenge in an influential paper he wrote about the future development of Harvard's university libraries. Dan Hazen said, "The cloud is becoming the locus for more and more data and applications. Large data sets invite structured inquiries across masses of information at a scale that can easily exceed the capabilities of any one library or institution." And that this was creating in the library world a crisis of purpose and identity. These 3 case studies will focus on types of documentation through life cycles. I think provide object lessons that illustrate these challenges. First, the changing news landscape, government records, Earth data and its platforms. News. Traditionally, libraries have acquired and stored important news material, important newspapers and news transcripts. The newspaper or the news reporting was famously called the first rough draft of history. These have been important documents for all sorts of disciplines in the past, and also important documents to preserve the public record. That was the old way. Today, the New York Times website is a dynamic, living repository of multimedia content, richly annotated and marked up by a swarm of editors, reporters, photographers, and photographers that work within the content management systems and the digital asset management systems deployed by the Times. These mammoth, robust, and powerful digital systems to manage digital content are deployed not at the local newspaper or local station of CNN or Televisa. They're deployed at the syndicate and parent company level. They provide a richness of content, but also an enormous amount of data This kind of information, this is a photograph, recent photograph from the New York Times website on the fighting in Iraq, where a newspaper will provide one photograph with a short caption. The digital Times provides multiple photographs with a great deal of metadata. This kind of content now has a longer shelf life as an enterprise asset for large media corporations, and storage has become almost cost-free. The Gartner consultants issued a report on digital asset management systems in 2016. They said the proliferation of channels and growing consumer preference for video and image-rich content has caused content to explode in volume, velocity, and variety. This has led to the challenge of managing all of these content assets across many channel-specific and specialized formats, languages, and variants on a global scale, as well as delivering them to multiple platforms like mobile, web, and others. This presents enormous custody challenge for libraries. In effect, the legal deposit mechanism that's been the engine for driving the development of national library collections has now been rendered essentially no longer meaningful. Good news is that there are new kinds of platforms and tools being introduced outside of libraries. The role of news organizations is changing, where journalists are now becoming analysts and curators. They are creating tools to mine large data repositories and tools and platforms like Document Cloud. In October 2010, WikiLeaks posted to the web over 391,000 U.S. Defense Department incident reports from the Iraq War. Within weeks, journalists from the British newspaper The Guardian had plotted all the reported incidents on a map of Iraq and graphed the casualties month by month, showing where violence was concentrated and vividly charting the human toll of the conflict. In 2015, the internal files of the Panama City law firm Mossack Fonseca were leaked by an anonymous source. They detailed the concealment of financial holdings in offshore banks and shadow holding companies by individuals and corporations from more than 50 countries. This is likely the largest data set of leaked insider information in the history of journalism. More than 300,000 offshore companies were named. The data included 11.5 million files, ranging from emails and PDFs to obscure and old formats that are no longer in use. It's 2.16 terabytes of data. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, founded in 1997, a global network of more than 200 investigative reporters in 70 countries who collaborate on in-depth investigative stories, became the repository, created the repository, an online public repository of these papers. The consortium had to reverse engineer the original internal database from the Mossack Fonseca firm, restore old format data that was in old format files, and process the files and put them in an open access database that responds to APIs and applications and enables users not only to search, but also to visualize the relationships between the individual's name and between the law firms and the clients, and between the clients and the banks. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists went further to create an interactive, online interactive, which is a marvel of data visualization, where one can detect connections between hundreds of politicians and heads of state, shadow companies, and offshore banks and tax havens. This is the kind of work to promote retention and accessibility of materials, and also discoverability that used to be done in libraries. Next case study, growing world of government documents. Government is big, and here I'm going to focus only on a small subset of government records, related to government surveillance. In the 1960s and 70s, the Brazilian government military conducted a series of tribunals, of closed tribunals of activists and political opponents of the regime that resulted in the disappearance of thousands of people and also the punitive measures by the governments. The records of that, the transcripts of those trials were preserved through an international effort and reside in just 2 years ago. The Center for Research Libraries and the Brazilian Attorney General's Office collaborated to digitize those files and put them on the web. The CRL was the only place where those files survived. In 2005, the files of the Guatemalan Policía Nacional surfaced in an abandoned barracks in Guatemala City. These included surveillance reports on political activists and individuals active in Guatemalan politics during the Guatemalan Civil War. The photographs and other documents were preserved by an international consortium of governments, and the records of those, the digitized copies of those records are now held by the University of Texas at Austin, University of Texas Libraries. Today, surveillance is a different game. This is the Bumblehive, the U.S. National Security Agency's data repository in Utah, which would fit within it 2 national archives and records administrations of the United States. Edward Snowden revealed that government collection of phone and messaging information and data today is occurring on a new and unprecedented scale. The National Security Agency directive with regard to capture of data is collected all. Also, police and public safety agencies are creating records of great technical sophistication at an enormous rate, an alarming rate, with consequences. Videos used in combination, police department video, body cam videos are used in a lot of American cities and will probably get even more widespread adoption as time goes on. This video is used in combination with face and voice recognition software. This has led to the creation of vast private artificial intelligence repositories of personal data, which are hosted by private corporations. The largest repository of police body cam video is run by a subsidiary of Taser International, the corporation that makes Taser and other police equipment. The largest existing library of human portraits is held by giants in the face recognition software business, like Meikui in China and the Beijing-based artificial intelligence, security, and deep learning firm SenseTime. Documentation of the surface of the Earth, the atmosphere of the subsurface of the Earth, and its oceans for environmental purposes and agricultural and land use purposes and security is also changing. Now, commercial satellites outnumber government satellites in the stratosphere. Since 1990, in the 1990s, there was a relaxation of restrictions on allowing commercial satellites to be in orbit. This was a relaxation of restrictions after the Cold War ended. Planet, formerly Planet Labs, is an integrated aerospace and data analytics company that operates the largest fleet of Earth imaging satellites in existence, collecting a massive amount of information about the planet. They operate over 180 satellites, and they develop the online software and tools that serves data to businesses, governments, and research users. In 2016, Planet documented this sprawling La Pampa gold mine in Peru, spilling south of the Malinowski River in Peru, illegally entering the Tampobata National Reserve, a protected forest. The Amazon Conservation Association used Planet Corporation data to publish a series of alerts which tracked hundreds of hectares of illegal expansion and mapped alterations to the course of the Malinowski River. Peruvian government since intervened is now actively targeting the illegally sited mining equipment inside the reserve. Digital Globe, another major provider of Earth imagery from private satellites, provides documentation of the destructive fires in Southern California, as well as the devastation of Rohingya areas in Myanmar by the Rohingya government troops. The Digital Globe satellite imagery became a critical source very recently during North Korea's nuclear tests in 2016-2017. It was through the use of the Digital Globe imagery that the U.S. was able to detect activity around the nuclear sites in North Korea. Not just the satellite data, but the vast data and imaging of the ocean floor created by mapping and seismological sensing by ExxonMobil, private corporations like ExxonMobil, BP, and Royal Dutch Shell, and big agricultural data aggregated by Monsanto and ConAgra and others. This data all eventually will become discoverable in matters of public interest like investigations and prosecutions, but meanwhile it remains in the dark, subject to loss and in danger of corruption through time and neglect. Proprietary platforms in the cloud are increasingly becoming the venues of choice, too, for organizing, storing, and managing critical content data, creating a worrying reliance on proprietary software providers for data relating to public policy. The result of all this, these three case studies, three types of changes in three types of data, is we don't know who will ensure public accessibility for the future for critical data, critical to human life and even to the planet. We have a fundamentally and profoundly transformed information landscape. Massive volume, velocity, and complexity of information, privatization, and commercialization of information. So what did we do? CRL in 2014 hosted a forum on the Born Digital Government Information, the Leviathan forum. We came out of that with a changed sense of the strategies libraries should pursue, or would have to pursue to ensure the long-term accessibility and integrity of government information. Triage, focusing efforts on what is truly at risk and what's not likely to be adequately preserved by other actors, so public or secular or private. Drilling down to determine what's at risk requires a full technical understanding of the digital information life cycle and the supply chain. Differentiate. Know that researchers in different fields require different things. The integrity and authenticity of data mean one thing to an economist and another to a cultural historian. Collectivize. Actively engage as a community with the key suppliers of information and unite to gain leverage in dealing with entities like Digital Globe, New York Times, Economist.com. Act up. Forge new alliances with other types of organizations that share libraries' interest in public access to information and documentation, such as Transparency International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. If one defines preservation as protecting and empowering access for our constituents, then archiving becomes only one of several appropriate strategies. What are the skills needed for this? Systems analysis and digital forensics. I spoiled the suspense. Okay. The ability too many of the repositories of knowledge of today are proprietary black boxes. Their inner workings little understood by those outside the companies that run them. We need the ability in librarians to audit highly complex systems and applications, to detect bias in algorithms, to detect corruption, breaks in the chains of evidence, and identify potential for the loss of historically important financial data. We need digital forensics, the ability to attribute, date, and otherwise validate a given document or piece of evidence that's the product of such a system. Understand how those documents are transformed by proprietary systems and applications. Law and public policy, knowledge of law and public policy. We need more lawyers in libraries. Librarians have to be familiar with the laws of evidence and the standards of admissibility in courts. Their courts are the first places where the facts of the matter are established. There needs to be knowledge of intellectual property laws that constrain the reproduction and display of information and thereby threaten survival in the digital world of critical evidence and documentation. You need knowledge of privacy laws and negotiating skills, since most transactions now are contractual. Community activism. Libraries are by nature rooted in specific communities. They are at the heart of great universities. They are the repositories of the heritage of nations. They support the awareness and knowledge required of citizens of democracies to thrive and participate in public life. They are responsible for protecting the rights and advancing the interests of those communities in the world of information and data. There are natural partnerships with transparency organizations, journalists. Well, they need to make bold strategic investments in open access, investment of university endowments, in fact, in open access, and advocate for intelligent regulation of industry providers to preserve the integrity, transparency, and rights of all. In summary, like it or not, libraries have an important role to play in civil society. If we do not invest heavily and restructure fundamentally, then the playing field will tilt irreversibly away from the individual and the collective interests of our constituents, the academic researchers, the citizens, the NGOs, to favor the interests of corporations, entrenched regimes, and others that benefit from an enlightened and informed citizenry.